I've always relished Dickens's exuberance as a writer. I hadn't fully engaged with Dickens the man until I started to perform his public readings on television. It was very exciting to me to discover that this great novelist had also been, or could have been, a great actor. I think that's unique. And it was a sort of key to the writing. I understood that his writing is inherently theatrical, and I suppose that's what had drawn me to it in the first place. I did a show called The Importance of Being Oscar, which was about Oscar Wilde. It was written by a famous Irish actor called Michael McLearmore. And I think he rather invented this very interesting form of theatre, which you could call living biography. That's to say, the actor, in his own person, stands on the stage and talks about a great writer. And as the evening progresses, he inhabits the characters and indeed the character of the writer himself. So essentially it's a piece of storytelling. It's me telling the story of Charles Dickens. And in Dickens's case particularly, his characters very much connect with his own experience. So they're either autobiographical or they come from worlds that he inhabited. I hope that you might leave the theatre feeling that you'd actually encountered Dickens, or for a while you'd lived inside his head.
Does no other profession occur to you, Nickleby, that a young man of your figure and address might take up easily and see the world to advantage in? No, Mr. Crummles, sighed Nicholas, shaking his head. Why, then I'll tell you one. The stage! The stage, cried Nicholas. The theatrical profession. I am in the theatrical profession myself. My wife is in the theatrical profession. My children are in the theatrical profession. I had a dog, lived and died in it from a puppy. Say but the word, and I'll bring you out. I want a novelty. Charles Dickens once said, the more real the man, the more genuine the actor. That may or may not be so. It's an open question, but certainly he was writing of himself. I was an actor and a speaker from a baby. His father, John, used to take him to the public house and set him up on a table where he would sing and dance to the wonder of the assembly. He did impersonations of various local eccentrics. He was an irrepressible entertainer, an infant phenomenon. I must have been a horrible little nuisance, he said years later. At the drop of a hat, he would quote from his favourite poem, The Sluggard. "'Tis the voice of the sluggard, I hear him complain. You have waked me too soon, I must slumber again." He had, too, a toy theatre in which he played with characters penny plain and twopence coloured. Some say that he was playing with them for the rest of his life. In Chatham, in Kent, where he grew up, he was remembered as an active, alert, eager, odd child. Hysterical, perhaps, oversensitive, certainly, but decidedly odd. I looked at nothing that I know of, but I saw everything. And now I see the outside of our house with the latticed bedroom windows standing open to let in the sweet-smelling air, and the ragged old rook's nests still dangling on the lime trees at the bottom of the front garden, where the fruit clusters in the trees, richer and riper than fruit has ever been since in any other garden. These idyllic childhood days were without any question the happiest days of Charles Dickens's entire life. And then, quite suddenly, he was snatched away from all that happiness. His father, John, who worked for an office of the Admiralty, was transferred to London, and the 10-year-old Charles Dickens found himself on the way to the city that would change his life forever. London, but not Victorian London, much less modern London, a much more intimate, a more colourful, a more compact city. A city of street criers and strolling peddlers, of cockfights and public hangings, of pleasure gardens and small, unlicensed theatres. There was no uniformity or system to it whatever. So oddity and eccentricity of every kind could flourish. In time, it would become the city of Charles Dickens's imagination, of his vision. But for the 10-year-old boy, nothing lay ahead for him at all. The family fortunes were in rapid decline. His father was spending quite recklessly, and his mother's attempts to open a school, Mrs. Dickens's establishment, she called it, foundered when she failed to enroll a single pupil. And then, just 2 days after his 12th birthday, Charles Dickens was set to work in a blacking warehouse beside the Thames. No exaggeration whatever to say that his childhood died in that dismal place. The blacking was for shoes, and the job of the 12-year-old Charles Dickens was to cover each pot of paste blacking, first with a piece of oil paper, then with a piece of blue paper, to twist a piece of string round each, and then to clip the paper neat and close all around. When he'd done a few gross of these, he was to paste on each a printed label. He worked a 10-hour day with a break at noon for lunch and another in the late afternoon for tea. He'd only been in the blacking warehouse for 3 days when fresh calamity struck. His father, John, insolvent, ruined, was confined within the Marshalsea prison for debtors. When my father said, "The sun has set on my life forever," I really believe that those words had broken my heart. He took those same words and wove them into the fabric of his art when he introduced them into the pages of David Copperfield, whether the expression of his father, John Dickens, or of his imaginary character, Mr. Micawber. Who can tell? Perhaps there's no difference. The first Sunday after he was taken to the prison, I was to go and visit Mr. Micawber there and have dinner with him. He was waiting for me within the gates, and he took me to his room, top story but one, where we cried very much. Then, after many tears, he told me this: "Annual income, Copperfield, £20. Annual expenditure, £19, 19 shillings and 6. Result, happiness. Annual income, £20. Annual expenditure, £20, 0 and 6. Result, misery. The blossom is blighted, the grass withered, the god of day goes down on the dreary scene, and, well, in short, you're flawed forever, as I am." Having said this, he borrowed a shilling of me for a glass of ale, gave me a written order on Mrs. Micawber for the amount, put away his pocket handkerchief, and cheered up. Not so easy for the 12-year-old Charles Dickens to cheer up. Worse was in store for him. His mother and his brothers and sisters, by now 5 in number, had gone to stay with John Dickens in the Marshalsea, but the 12-year-old Charles Dickens was put into lodgings beside the prison. At night, when the boy walked home through the darkened London streets, it was filled with terror and anxiety. But he said nothing about it at the time. Not to anyone. He laid it within his breast, where it grew and grew into a vision of the world. At the time, he just did his work, and to his little working companions, he told stories, or rather, lies, about his childhood and about his family. Charles Dickens never really stopped lying all his life. It was the source and secret of his existence, just as in time it would become the salvation of his art. I knew that I was common, and I wished that I was not common. And the lies somehow came out of that. "I want to see you playing cards with this boy," said Miss Havisham. "With this boy?" said Estelle, with disdain. "But this is a common labouring boy. He calls the knaves jacks." axe does this boy? And what coarse hands he has? And what thick boots? I had never thought to be ashamed of my hands before, but they came to seem a most indifferent pair. Her contempt for me was so strong it became infectious. And I caught it. At night, the boy read his old books, reading as if for life, as he said. Tom Jones, Roderick Random, Peregrine Pickle, Robinson Crusoe, Don Quixote, they all kept me company. They kept alive my fancy and hope of something beyond that time and place. But then, as if he were a child in a fairy story or a novel of his own making, the horrors of Charles Dickens's early years were completely and abruptly lifted. His father came into an inheritance. He discharged himself from the Marshalsea, and he took the 13-year-old Charles Dickens out of the blacking warehouse, home again forever and ever. Home for good and all. He was put into a school along the Hampstead Road. It wasn't a very good school, but then he wasn't there for very long. He left at the age of 15, all the education he would ever get, to become a lawyer's clerk, and he plunged headlong into the life of London. His knowledge of the city was wonderful, his employer said. He knew the position of any of the shops in all of the West End streets, and another colleague recalled that he could imitate, in a way I have scarcely heard equalled, the low population of London in all their varieties. See, he was still that irrepressible entertainer. What he wanted more than anything else at that early age was to be an actor, to go on the stage. All his life, Dickens loved the conversation and the company of players. He attended all the latest productions. And more than that, he acted in plays, he directed them, he wrote them, he produced them, and he was very good at it. At the very height of his fame as a novelist, a stagehand confided in him that we in the theatre business, Mrs. Dickens, always think it was a crying shame when you took up writing books. As for his clothes, they were always vivid and highly coloured, almost theatrical, you might say, and those who observed him in the street noticed that he had a tendency to strike up dramatic poses. Almost as if he didn't know the difference between the street and the stage. Well, of course, the street was his stage. It was his theatre. It was the theatre of his mind. He wandered the city incessantly, looking, observing, noting. Didn't talk to many people, but he observed them all. And then, at the age of 17, he started to write it down. He wrote essays, he wrote stories. I could write anything, he said. And then at the age of 23, he was asked to write a series of sketches upon the adventures of some Cockney sportsmen. These were the days, you see, when Londoners used to take to rural areas in order to make fools of themselves. He started to work immediately, but first he needed a name. He always needed a name to begin with. Then he remembered the coaches on the Bath to London Road. The name of the proprietor, emblazoned in bright yellow letters against a maroon background, was Moses Pickwick. That was it. Pickwick. The Pickwick papers. Heads! Heads! Take care of your heads! Cried the loquacious stranger, Jingle by name, as the coach came out under the low archway that in those days formed the entrance to the coach yard. Terrible place. Dangerous. Other day, 5 children, mother, tall lady, eating sandwich, forgot the arch, crash, knock, children turn round, mother's head off, sandwich in hand, no mouth to put it in. Head of a family off. Shocking, shocking. Sportsman, sir, he inquired of Mr. Winkle. Not just at present, sir, said that gentleman. Oh, you should be a sportsman. It's a fine pursuit, fine pursuit. Keep dogs? No, not at present, said Mr. Winkle. Oh, you should keep dogs. Fine animals, sagacious creatures. Dog of my own once. Pointer. Surprising instincts. Out shooting one day, entering enclosure, dog stopped. Whistled. Whistled again. No go. stock still. Called his name, Ponto! Ponto! Wouldn't move. Dog transfixed. Staring at a board, looked up, read inscription. Gamekeeper has orders to shoot all dogs entering it. Wouldn't pass it. Wonderful dog, that. Valuable dog, that. Very singular circumstance, that, sir, said Mr. Pickwick. Would you allow me to make a note of it? Silence in court, announced the entry of the judge, who was most particularly short and so fat that he seemed all face and waistcoat. He rolled in on his two little turned legs, and having bobbed to the bar having bobbed to him, he put his two little legs underneath the table and his little three-cornered hat upon it. Call Nathaniel Winkle! Here, sir. Now, sir, will you have the goodness to let his lordship and the jury know what your name is? Will you, sir? Winkle, sir. Have you any Christian name, sir? Nathaniel, sir. Daniel. Any other name? Nathaniel, sir. Nathaniel Daniel or Daniel Nathaniel? Nathaniel, sir. I mean, my lord. Not Daniel at all. What did you tell me your name was Daniel for then, sir? I didn't, my lord. Yes, you did, sir. What would I have Daniel on my notes for unless you told me so, sir? Mr. Winkle has a very short memory, your lordship. Call Samuel Weller. What is your name, sir? Samuel Weller, your lordship. Do you spell that with a V or a W? All depends on the taste and fancy of the speller, my lord. I haven't had occasion to spell it more than once or twice in my life. But I spells it with a we. Can we continue with the cross-examination, if you please? Certainly, your lordship. Now, Mr. Weller, you were standing in the passage, but you saw nothing of what was going forward. Have you a pair of eyes, Mr. Weller? Well, I have got a pair of eyes, yes, and that's just it. Perhaps if they was a pair of double million magnifying gas microscopes, an extra pair, I might be able to see through 2 flights of stairs and a deal door. But being only eyes, you see, my vision's limited. The Pickwickians made the world laugh. Within a year, the completed novel had appeared in France, in Germany, in Italy, in America, in Australia. It even made its way as far as Russia. In the Pickwick Papers, Dickens created a vision of the world, but he did it by bringing to life a tradition of Englishness that had never previously been captured. It was altogether quite a new thing, a novel which appeared in monthly installments, leaving the readers almost literally hanging on to the end of each episode. It was a huge success from the very beginning. 4,000 copies a month were sold at the start, and by the end they were selling 40,000 copies a month. There were Pickwick hats, Pickwick coats, Pickwick cigars. Led by the young Charles Dickens, Samuel Pickwick and the Pickwickians joined the immortals. He was 25 years old, and his fame was known throughout the world. It was all before me. I was so overcharged with delight and with gusto and with anticipation and oh dear, I almost forgot to mention my wife. He had married Catherine Hogarth just after completing the first episode of the Pickwick Papers. They met, so to speak, professionally. Her father was a famous literary editor for whom Dickens had written a series of urban sketches. The marriage was, in a manner of speaking, the next piece of business. Catherine, when he married her, was 20 years old, a freshly coloured, pretty plump little creature with a genial, smiling sort of a countenance and a very sweet nature, and Dickens was madly and passionately in love with her. She had a younger sister, Mary, 16 at the time of the marriage, and Dickens was almost equally attached to her. When the newlyweds moved into what Dickens called a frightfully first-class family mansion with awful responsibilities in Doughty Street in Holborn, Mary moved in with them too, and a very happy little family they made, the three of them. And then one evening in the spring of 1837, they went, the three of them, Charles and Catherine and Mary, to the theatre to see a play which Dickens had written. It was called Is She His Wife? On returning to Doughty Street later that evening, Mary retired to her room at about 1 in the morning, but she scarcely had time to take off her clothes before she emitted a sharp cry of pain and collapsed. The following day, she was dead. Heart failure. 17 years old. Thank God, said Dickens, that she died in my arms, and that the last words that she uttered were of me. For the rest of his life, he said, from that time forward, he was pursued by a vague, unhappy loss or want of something. In his next novel, Oliver Twist, he strikes for the first time in his own work the note of primal terror, of a child's helplessness in an adult world. With his slice of bread in his hand and his little brown parish cap on his head, Oliver was now led away from the wretched home where one kind word or look never lighted the gloom of his infant years. Yet he burst into an agony of childish grief when the cottage gate closed after him. Wretched as were the little companions in misery he was leaving behind him, they were the only friends he had ever known, and the sense of his loneliness in the great wide world sank for the first time into the child's heart. No, sir! No! Sobbed Oliver, clinging to Mr. Bumble's hand. No, sir, I will be good indeed. Indeed I will. Sir, I am a very little boy, sir, and it is so what? So lonely, sir. So very lonely. Now, this is the extraordinary thing. Dickens was writing Oliver Twist and the Pickwick Papers at exactly the same time. Comedy and melodrama, farce and sentiment, side by side. He called it streaky bacon. What delighted him more than anything else within the bounds of one novel, or indeed one chapter, was to move from a scene of sorrow and sentiment to one of wild humor and grotesque high spirits. In life, his energy was almost terrifying. Light and motion flashed from every part of him, said a friend. He was all contrast and contradiction. Nothing grey or middling. With strangers, he could be as merry and bright as you like, but with his own family, he was reserved and taciturn. With sad or ailing or shy people, he could be the kindest, most sympathetic person on the face of the earth, but with his friends, he was impatient and domineering. He could be bubbling over with laughter one moment, and then the very next second, his eyes would flash like danger lamps. He loved the children in his novels. He seemed not to love his own children as they grew up. He worshipped food and drink in his fiction, but in life he ate little and drank less. Some say that he was only ever really happy when he was alone in his study. writing. But he wasn't alone. His characters surrounded him in crowds, he said. They touched him, and they spoke to him. What really happened, of course, is that he became them. He spoke their words out loud as he was writing them. He would go to the mirror and put on their faces just as he put on their voices. Look at this, Nickleby. What do you think of this for a theatrical poster? First appearance of the unrivaled Miss Pitoka of the Theatre Royal, Drury Lane. Dear me, Mr. Crumbles, I know that young lady. Then, Nickleby, you are acquainted with as much talent as has ever been compressed into the body of one young woman. That is to say, talent of a certain sort. The blood drinker. The blood drinker? The blood drinker will die with that young woman. Mrs. Crummles taught her nearly all she knows. Mrs. Crummles was the original blood drinker. Was she indeed? Oh, yes, yes, yes. Who's obliged to give it up, though? Did it disagree with her? Not so much with her as with her audiences. No one could stand it. It was too tremendous. You don't quite know what Mrs. Crummles is yet. Well, I think I know you don't. You don't indeed. I don't. And that's a fact. The first time I ever saw that astonishing woman, Nickleby, she was standing on her head upon the butt end of a spear, surrounded by blazing fireworks. You astonish me. She astonished me. Mr. Squeers, sir, what is the first class? First class, Nickleby, is English spelling and philosophy. Now, where's the first boy? Where is he? Where's that boy? Where's the first boy? Preacher! He's out cleaning the back parlour window. Quite right, so he is. We go on the practical system of teaching here, Nickleby. C-L-E-A-N. Clean. Verb, active, to make bright. Scour. W-I-N, win. D-E-R, D. Window. A casement. When lad knows that, out of book he goes and does it. Now, where's the second boy? Where is he? Where's the second boy? Where's that second boy? Preacher! He's out weeding the garden. Quite right, so he is. B-O-T, bot, T-I-N, tin, N-E-Y, ne. Botany. Noun, substantive, a knowledge of plants. When a lad knows that botany means a knowledge of plants, he goes and weeds them. That's our system, Nickleby. What do you think of it? Well, it's a very, useful one. Mr. Squeers, I believe you. Nickleby, I believe you. Now, third boy. Third boy, what's a horse? A beast, sir. Quite right. So it is. A horse is a quadruped. And quadruped is Latin for beast. Now you're perfect in that, you can go and look after my horse. Rub him down well, or I'll rub you down. As for the rest of class, if any lad talks me out leave, I'll take the skin off his back. Nicholas Nickleby, as entertaining and theatrical a novel as has perhaps ever been written, also changed the face of English education. Dickens's satire on the school run by Wackford Squeers, Dotheboys Hall, led to the immediate closure of private schools in Yorkshire and elsewhere. In a similar spirit of outrage, Dickens satirized the new Poor Law in Oliver Twist. He was denounced by the newspapers for his radical fervor. He was making a difference. He loved it. What a thing it is, he said, to have power. But of course, it wasn't political power that Dickens wielded, nor even social power. It was power of the imagination, which is how he was able to convince his readers of the truth, that is to say, the essential truth of his most extravagant visions. It's been said that when the fire of one of Dickens's novels was threatening to grow dim, he would throw on a child to stoke up the flames. Dickens's children do have a most peculiar habit of dying. After Nicholas Nickleby, he was writing The Old Curiosity Shop, and of course, in the end, little Nell had to die. But her death left him forlorn and desolate. All night long, I have been pursued by that child. I'm breaking my heart over this story. I'm slowly murdering the poor child. Yet it must be. All next week I shall be lain up with a broken heart, but I think it has come famously. Bring out your pocket handkerchiefs. She was dead. No sleep so beautiful and calm, so free from trace of pain, so fair to look on. She was like a creature fresh from the hand of God, waiting for the breath of life. Not one that had lived and suffered death. Her couch was dressed with, here and there, some winter berries and green leaves gathered from a spot that she had used to favor. When I die, put near me something that has loved the light and had the sky above it always. Those were her words. Now she was dead. Well, the death scene caused an absolute sensation. The stern jurist Lord Jeffrey was found sobbing in his study after reading it. And Dickens's friend, the great actor William Macready, was literally prostrate. The Irish patriot Daniel O'Connell, flinging the periodical in which it was written out of the window of his railway carriage, cried, "He should not have killed her!" At a slightly later date, Oscar Wilde was less affected. It would take a heart of stone to read the death of little Nell without laughing. Meanwhile, Catherine Dickens had been creating a few children of her own, 4 in quick order with more to follow. They just moved into a much larger house off the Marylebone Road, which Dickens said resembled nothing so much as a hospital ward. Well, with Walter sniffling and Katie snuffling and young Charles Jr. sickening for something mysterious. He'd already banished his parents, setting them up in a cottage in Devon, but they had a way of turning up in small matters like the father forging the son's name to guarantee certain debts. How Dickens raged against them. He longed to get away from them all. He had dreams of extensive traveling. He was haunted in particular by visions of America. He wanted to encounter a country as young and energetic as he was. And the Americans wanted to see him too. Only months earlier they had gathered on the harbor at Boston asking newly arrived passengers, "Is little Nell dead?" Now they wanted to know, "Is Charles Dickens alive? And is he here?" Wherever he went, large crowds followed him. They gave him parties, they gave him receptions, he made speeches, he entertained 1,000 guests, and finally he was introduced to the President of the United States, who said to him, "We had not expected so young a man, sir." He was not greeted with unmitigated approval. Oh no, by no means. The President's daughter, for example, remarked that he wears too much jewelry. Very British in appearance. But not the best British. The American newspapers, too, were quite savage in their attacks on him and often very personal, describing his clothing as flashy, his assertion of copyright in his own work as the act of a tradesman, and his mind was described by the New York Herald as the most coarse, vulgar, impudent, and superficial. Now, Charles Dickens was not accustomed to public criticism, and he left the country in a state of some pique. He had his own revenge on those same newspapers, however, as only he could, in the pages of Martin Chuzzlewit, a novel which on its first appearance in America was burnt in the streets. When Dickens himself returned from the United States, his passion for travel was by no means abated, so he swept his entire family off on a grand tour of Europe, which lasted a full year. In Naples, Dickens witnessed Mount Vesuvius in a state of eruption, its dark clouds billowing in the clear blue sky. So what did he do? He climbed up it, of course, at once, that very night. He was warned of the dangers of ascending a volcano in a state of eruption, but he insisted it must be done. He must look into its smoking mouth. Accompanied only by one guide, he ascended the remaining 100 yards by foot as cinders and ash rained down upon them. And then, at the peak, triumphantly, I gazed into the flaming bowels of the earth. Then I came back again, alight in half a dozen places, burning from head to foot. This is pure Dickens. The wild Dickens blazing away, just as he blazed away at his novels. And not just in his novels, his fire was increasingly turned against what he perceived to be the scandals and enormities of his own time. He was fast becoming the writer who spoke for an entire age. He was made the editor of a great new national newspaper. He was chairing committees. He addressed speeches on prisons, on the slums. And he'd just launched a series of Christmas novels on social themes, which had a triumphant beginning with A Christmas Carol, the little novel in which he summons up the thin phantoms of two miserable and ragged children, ignorance and want. This story of Ebenezer Scrooge and Bob Cratchit and Tiny Tim took as great a hold over Dickens as it had over everybody else. While he was writing it, he seemed possessed by this story of redemption, of a man forced to face the truth about himself and change. It was a kind of modern morality tale, and the effect was immediate and overwhelming. One employer, after reading the book, gave his employees an extra day's holiday. And Thomas Carlyle, when he finished reading it, went out and bought himself a turkey. The spirit of Christmas, as newly defined by Charles Dickens, was everywhere. But how, at that triumphant moment in his career, how did Charles Dickens think of himself? Well, the answer is he didn't think of himself at all. He wasn't in the least bit interested in self-analysis and had no desire whatever to dwell on the sources of his art. The only way Dickens could approach himself was by becoming a character in one of his own novels, by turning himself into fiction, which is why he was writing a new novel in which he would tell his own story. But first he needed a name. He always needed a name to begin with. Maybury, Welbury, Top Tower, oh, Copper Boy, Copper Stone, Copper Field, Copper... Copper Field. This is Charles Dickens here, this is David Copperfield here. They're staring at one another face to face. Which one do you think will blink first? This novel, Dickens's favorite among all his own works, cost him very dear. While he was writing it, his friends became gravely concerned for him. He was giddy and nauseous. His left leg trembled uncontrollably. He could not stop his hand or his arm from shaking. He had a pain down his left side, the same pain that he'd suffered as a boy in the blacking warehouse. He suffered, too, from extreme depression of mind and a disposition to shed tears from morning to night. As for repose, for some men there is no such thing in this life. Idleness wearies me more than labor. To do nothing exhausts me. Yet how strange it is never to be at rest, never to be satisfied. You see, he was still climbing that mountain, but he rarely took the trouble to look back at those who were obliged to travel with him. His wife, Catherine, after 10 years of childbearing, was often very ill with giddy spells and nauseous headaches. She suffered, in general, from living in the immediate vicinity of Charles Dickens. And then in the spring of 1851, his father, John, that irrepressible reprobate, died quite suddenly after a terrible operation on his bladder without anesthetic, in which his room was turned, in his son's words, into a slaughterhouse of blood. And then just 3 weeks after that, Dickens's youngest daughter, Dora, died, also quite suddenly. At the time, Dickens was addressing the annual dinner of the General Theatrical Fund, praising those actors whom he so admired. When he finished the speech, he was taken to one side, and the terrible news was broken to him. All that night, he sat at the bedside of his dead child. But then, just like those actors he was so praising, he resumed the strife and fight of life. I'm quite confident that I should rust, break down, and die if I spared myself. Much better to die doing. And ever by day and night, wrote Dickens, under the sun and under the stars, move all we restless travelers through the pilgrimage of life. And somewhere, he said, somewhere in all those travels was a still, small voice crying out within him, crying out, help. London, Michaelmas term, lately over, the Lord High Chancellor sits in Lincoln's Inn Hall. Implacable November weather. As much mud on the streets as if the waters had but newly retired from the face of the earth, and it would not be wonderful to meet a megalosaurus, 40 foot long or so, waddling like an elephantine lizard up Holborn Hill. Smoke lowering down the chimney pots, making a thin black drizzle, with flakes of soot in it as big as fully grown snowflakes gone into mourning, one might imagine, for the death of the sun. Fog everywhere. Fog up the river as it flows among the meadows. Fog down the river as it rolls, defiled among the tears of shipping and the waterside pollutions of a great and dirty city. Fog on the Kentish heights. Fog on the Essex marshes. And hard by Temple Bar, in Lincoln's Inn Fields, at the very heart of the fog, sits the Lord High Chancellor in his High Court of Chancery. Never can there come fog too thick. Never can there come mud or mire too deep for the High Court of Chancery, most pestilent of hoary sinners, as it sits this day under the sight of heaven and earth. Dickens felt himself, at the age of 45, to be growing older. People were saying quite loudly that he'd burned himself out, that David Copperfield was his last flare. Little Dorrit, when it appeared, was dismissed as twaddle. So here he was, middle-aged, with his achievements apparently behind him, and what lay ahead of him? Oh, only an increasingly loveless marriage and a large, ever-expectant family. And please remember, too, the great poignant note of his life, that vague, unhappy loss or want of something which has pursued him since the early death of his sister-in-law. Where again will he ever find someone young, beautiful, and good? He felt that his life was closing down. My misery is amazing. My blankness inconceivable. Indescribable. But then, as it had in his past more than once, Dickens's life changed completely and irrevocably. At the age of 46, he met a young actress who had a small role in The Frozen Deep, an Arctic melodrama. Written by Dickens himself in collaboration with Wilkie Collins. Needless to say, he also played the principal role. He stage managed it, he produced it, he directed it, he even built the scenery. The actress was called Ellen Ternan. She was 18 years old, and Dickens fell deeply in love with her. Well, no, that's altogether too familiar a phrase. All the desperate intensity of his nature, all the yearning, all the emptiness found their focus in Ellen Ternan. She was the one thing missing from his life. For her, it must have been like walking through fire. He followed her and her family on a theatrical tour they were making across the country. He could no longer talk, sleep, eat, drink, write without the image of that young woman continually before him. And under that overwhelming emotion, Dickens came to a terrible decision. The woman with whom he had lived all these years was becoming insupportable to him. She was clumsy, she was ailing, she was tearful, she was not witty. She was not Ellen. She was growing old. He resented the memories that she evoked in him. He was frightened of growing old with her. So what did he do? Well, he behaved exactly like a character in one of his own novels. He gave instructions that the marital bedroom should be divided into two, and he had erected a brick wall between himself and his wife. And then, in the spring of 1858, after 22 years of marriage and 10 children, he asked her for a formal separation without giving her any reason whatever. She went back to live with her own family, and she never saw Dickens again. Her sister Georgina, meanwhile, who'd been helping out with the household, stayed behind and supported Dickens. Georgina now took command of the illustrious novelist's household. It was an ugly and a messy business made infinitely worse by Dickens's own disturbed and disturbing behavior. Rumors, of course, began to circulate almost immediately that Dickens was having an affair with a young actress, or, much worse from his point of view, that he was having an affair with his own sister-in-law. Under the pressure of all that, Dickens quite simply lost control. He had a letter printed in the Times in which he denounced misrepresentations, most cruel, most monstrous, most unjust, slanders passing over the country like unwholesome air. Yet not one in 1,000 of the readers of the newspaper had the remotest idea what he was talking about. Now, of course, they did. The editors of many other newspapers felt free to publicize the separation, and in so doing to turn against Dickens. He'd visited on himself the very thing that he most dreaded. He began to shun some of his oldest friends on the mere suspicion that they had expressed sympathy with his estranged wife, and have changed his publishers because they refused to print his letter in their periodical Punch. He broke down and wept at a lunch at the Athenaeum. He felt haunted and harassed on all sides. He was now looking very much older, his cheeks lined with deep furrows, his expression clouded and careworn. He began to write, tragically, of doomed marriage. I saw that everything within my sight, which ought to have been white, had been white long ago, but had lost its luster and was faded and yellow. I saw that the bride within the bridal gown was withered, like the gown, and like the flowers had no brightness left but the brightness of her own sunken eyes. I saw that the gown had once been put on the rounded figure of a young woman, but that the figure upon whom it now hung loose had shrunk into skin and bone. I should have cried out if I could. Who is it? Pip? Ma'am? Pip? Mr. Pumblechook's boy, ma'am. Come to play. Come closer. Let me look at you. Come nearer. As I stood before her, avoiding her eyes, I took note of the surrounding objects in detail, and I saw that her watch had stopped at 20 minutes to 9, and that a clock on the wall had stopped at 20 minutes to 9. Look at me. You're not afraid to look at a woman that has not seen the sun since you were born? No, ma'am. You know what I touch when I touch here? Yes, ma'am. What do I touch? Your heart, ma'am. Broken. Yet it was still Charles Dickens. His eyes were still bright. His clothes were still loud and theatrical. He continued to bear himself with almost military precision. The storm, like all storms, passed, or rather it hid itself in the heart of Charles Dickens and those close to him whose lives had changed forever. He bought a house in Camden Town for his wife and a carriage. Ellen Turner and her sisters moved into a house off Oxford Street. Whether he and Ellen were lovers, whether they ever would be lovers, on that matter, he and everyone else involved always remained silent. There are those who say that it was a sexless intimacy as between brother and sister, while others point to rumors of their having lived together at a later stage and even to possible children. But nothing is certain. It's the great mystery that Charles Dickens left behind him without pointing to any way out of the labyrinth. The personality of Charles Dickens, which at first sight seemed so transparent, so open, and so extrovert, proves on closer examination to be full of dark mysteries. Well, after all the ordeal and the scandal of the separation, when Dickens was truly at his absolute lowest, he did an astonishing thing. He decided to embark on a reading tour of the entire country. He wanted to find his audience again, to reach out to the people he feared he had lost. He knew he had huge power over his readers. Now he wanted to test it in the flesh. The first reading of A Christmas Carol took place in Edinburgh. He stage managed it with consummate brilliance. He wore a rose in his buttonhole, and he had a maroon screen behind him. I must have no one behind me. I must see everyone's face, and they must see mine. Everyone must see my face. poured himself a tumbler of water from a carafe while the applause subsided. And then he stood silent for a few moments, looking at his audience. And it's reported that his wonderful eyes had the power of meeting those of every single individual. Keep your eyes on me. Look at me. Now my eyes are on you. I need to be connected to you, and you to me, and I can transform. Then I can come alive. I am Quilp. I am Pecksniff. I am the Artful Dodger. I am Vincent Crummles. He had a different voice for every one of his characters, the hollow-tongued tones of Sergeant Buzz Fuzz, irresponsibility, the Jewish Cockney lisp of Fagin. Suppose that boy, of his own sake, for his own fancy, suppose he were to do all this. What then, my dear? The whining tones of the fat boy. I want to make your flesh creep. The dull, flat voice of a young female. Please, Mr. Sawyer. Mrs. Radley, you can't have no want. She locked up in there. Oh. He had his book in front of him on a lectern, but of course he didn't need to read his own words. He'd rehearsed them thoroughly and committed them to memory. He had them in more senses than one, by heart. And his audience knew them too. Perhaps no other writer in the world could have had the absolute confidence that his works were as familiar to his audience as they were to himself. His incomparable powers of storytelling, both as a writer and now as an actor, held them spellbound. Wild applause, tears, cheers, wonderful happiness. It is an unspeakable satisfaction to me to have left such an impression here in Edinburgh, in London, in Dublin, Wakefield, Huddersfield, York, Harrogate, Sheffield, Scarborough, Hull, Leeds, Halifax, Manchester, all in 11 days. He walked from Durham to Sunderland. He walked from Sunderland to Newcastle. He took the new train to Scotland, Edinburgh again, Glasgow, Aberdeen, Perth. Everywhere the theatres were sold out. People queued all day, sometimes all night, to see him. And they were not disappointed. They had come to see the most famous man of the age reading from his famous novels. But they got something more. This was theatre. This was acting. Dickens was finally able to become the actor he had always dreamt of being. His hands and his body were in constant motion, and his features changed so completely that he appeared to become the character he impersonated. Gamp is my name. Gamp my nature. She was a fat old woman, this Mrs. Gamp, with a husky voice and a moist eye, which she had a remarkable power of turning up. And only showing the whites of her eyes. Having very little neck, it cost her some trouble to look over herself. If one may say so, at those to whom she talked. She wore a black, rusty gown, somewhat the worse for snuff, with a shawl and a bonnet to correspond. The face of Mrs. Gamp, the nose in particular, was somewhat red and swollen, and it was difficult to enjoy her society without becoming conscious of a peculiar fragrance. As if a passing fairy had hiccuped and had previously been to a wine vault. Which is why she viewed a lying in and a laying out with equal relish. Ah! she said. But that was a safe sentiment in cases of mourning. Oh, dear!
When Gamp was summoned to his long home, and I seen him lying out in Guy's Hospital with a penny piece on each eye and his wooden leg under his arm. I felt nearly fainted away.
But I bore up. Here, Mrs. Gamp solaced herself with a pinch of snuff, and tilting her head slightly to one side, she looked at the sick man like a connoisseur viewing a doubtful work of art. Oh, dear, she said. He'll make a lovely corpse. Bah! Humbug! Out on a Merry Christmas. What's Christmas to you but a time for finding yourself a year older and not an hour richer? If I had my will, every idiot who goes about with a Merry Christmas on his lips would be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. So he would. I've been working late tonight, Master Copperfield. I've been improving my legal knowledge. I've been going through Tidds's practice. Oh, me, what a writer Mr. Tidd is, Master Copperfield. So I suppose you're quite a great lawyer by now, Uriah. Me, Master Copperfield? Oh, no, I'm a very humble person. I'm well aware I'm about the humblest person going. Let the other be where they may. My mother's likewise a very humble person. We live in humble abodes, Master Copperfield. We're very grateful for it, of course. My father's former calling was a humble one. He was a sexton. And, what is he now? He's a partaker of glory at the moment, Master Copperfield. Dickens gave his audiences all the characters that they knew and loved, but he also gave them entirely fresh and original creations. I'm the boy at Mugby. That's about what I am. You know what I mean? I think you do. I think you must. Now, listen. I am the boy at what is called the refreshment room at Mugby Junction Station. What's proudest boast is it never yet refreshed any mortal being. So next time you come across a boy so situated when you stop in a hurry at Mugby Station for something to drink, you take particular notice that he'll try to seem not to hear you. Or he'll appear in an absent manner to be surveying the railway line through a transparent medium composed of your head and body. That's me! Well, Starks it is. Oh, you should see our bandolining room at Mugby. That's where our missus and the young ladies bandolines their hair. You should see them twixt trains, bandolining away. As if they was anointing themselves for the combat. And then, when a train's due, you should see our young ladies pitching the stale pastry on a plate and chucking the sawdust sandwiches under the glass covers. And then, when a train arrives, oh, my Lord, you should see our missus keeping the public in check. Most beautiful. Her eyes omitting sparks. Her hair almost a coming unbandolined with rage. In all my time, I've never seen half so many cups of tea with milk given to them as wanted it without, nor half so many cups of tea without milk given to them as wanted it with. I fell in love with the refreshmenting trade all over again, and I was so glad I come into it when young. Whoever would begin to be worried with letting lodgings that was not a lone woman with a living to get is a thing inconceivable to me, my dears. Forgive the familiarity, but it comes natural talking to those I can trust, which I should hope was all mankind, but such is not so. They have but a room to let sign in your window and a watch on your mantelpiece, and farewell to it the second your back is turned, however gentlemanly the manners. Being your own sex is no safeguard, as I have reason in the shape of sugar tongs to know. For that lady, and a fine woman she was, got me to run for a glass of water for her on a plea of going to be confined. Certainly turned out to be true, but it was the police station. I'm a market cheap, Jack. You don't know what that is? No, you don't. I'll tell you. Here I am on the footboard of my car in a marketplace on a Saturday night. I put up a general miscellaneous lot and I says, now my free and independent voters, I'm going to give you a chance such as you never had in all your born days, nor yet the days preceding. This is what I'm going to do with you. Here's a pair of razors that will shave you closer than the Border Guardians. Here's a flat iron worth its weight in gold. Here's a frying pan, artificially flavoured with essence of beef steaks, so that you can fry bread and dripping in it for the rest of your life, and there you are, replete with animal fat. Here's half a dozen dinner plates that you can play the cymbals with to charm the baby when it's fractured. Stop, and I'll throw you in another article and I'll give you that, and that's a rolling pin. If only you can get into the baby's mouth when its teeth is coming through and rub the gums with it once, they'll come through double, in a fit of laughter equal to being tickled. Stop, and I'll throw you in another article, for I don't like the looks of you. For you don't have the appearance of buyers, and that's a looking glass, so as you can see how ugly you look when you don't buy. Now, what'd you say, eh? Eh? What'd you say? Did you say £1? No, you don't. You haven't got it. Did you say 10 shillings? No, you don't. You owe more to the landlord. I'll show you what I'll do with you. I'll leave them all up on the footboard of my cart. Razor blade, flat iron, frying pan, looking glass, dinner plates, razor blades. You can take the lot for 4 shillings, and I'll give you 6pence for your trouble. What? Now, do you know what I am? I'm a cheap Jack. He was always exhausted at the end of his performances. He used to go backstage and take off all his clothes because they were wet with sweat, and then he'd have a large brandy and water or a few sips of iced champagne, and then they were off again. In Liverpool, nearly 3,000 people were turned away from the hall where he was performing, and in Glasgow, 2 files of policemen had to fight back the crowds from breaking down the doors of the City Hall where he was reading. And while he was engaged in this triumphal progress around the British Isles, he started writing his next novel, A Tale of Two Cities. And while he was writing A Tale of Two Cities and continuing with a reading tour, he took over the editorship of a new weekly magazine called All the Year Round, most of which he wrote himself. He was buoyed up, you see, by all the celebration which greeted him everywhere, gave him the energy and purpose of his life, gave him the will to carry on. He felt, you see, that he'd faced down his past. He made an even more direct break with that past when he burned all his letters in the garden of his house at Gad's Hill. This was the house, incidentally, that his father had pointed out to him when he was a little boy in Rochester in Kent, telling him that if only he worked hard enough, maybe one day it might be his. Well, now it was. Whatever happens, dear friend, he wrote to someone at the time, don't look back. What does he do? Well, he wrote Great Expectations, in which he entirely rewrites his own past. Never has a novel been so filled with the horrors of childhood. The closer and closer I draw to my end, he said, I travel in the circle, nearer and nearer to my beginning. But after Great Expectations, he was planning a second reading tour. But before he embarked on that, he took a little holiday in the holiday retreat that he'd hired for Ellen Ternan and her mother near Boulogne. He was now traveling by ferry on a regular basis between the two countries. On one occasion, he brought back the women with him, and they took the 2:38 tidal train from Folkestone to London. But there was something wrong with the tracks. Some lines had been taken up for safety repairs. Near a viaduct, just as the train was approaching at 50 miles per hour, the train leapt a gap of 43 feet, and more than half of the carriages fell over the viaduct into the bed of the river below. The carriage in which Dickens and the women were travelling hung at a sharp angle, over the viaduct. The women screamed out in terror, and Dickens calmed them down, got them out, put them into a nearby horse and carriage away from prying eyes. Then he saw 2 guards running up and down. "Look at me," he said. "Tell me if you don't recognize me." "We know you very well, Mr. Dickens," they said, and handed over to him the management of the mission for help. He filled his top hat with water, and then he passed among the dead and the dying. And then, just at that moment, he recollected that he had left that month's episode of Our Mutual Friend inside the swaying carriage. So he climbed right back inside again and retrieved it. Well, despite that heroic episode, or perhaps because of it, Dickens's self-composure was never the same again. He was always ill and fearful when traveling by rail. And he was now subject to constant, vague rushes of terror. But who could stop him? He was now like that locomotive himself, speeding towards its crash. All the more astonishing, therefore, that he should decide immediately afterwards to embark on a reading tour of the United States of America, where the only form of transport readily available to him was the very one he now most dreaded, the railway train. Again, he had a huge success, the greatest single personal success of his entire career. But this time, it really shattered him. When he returned to England, he found he could no longer work at his old pace. The elasticity of his bearing was somewhat impaired, said his friend Forster, and the wonderful brightness of his eyes at times dimmed. Curiously, he could only read the top half of the letters above shop doors. Nonetheless, he continued to add new readings to his repertory. One afternoon, his son overheard the sounds of a violent quarrel in the fields beyond the house at Gad's Hill. 2 people were engaged in a savage and terrible uproar. Stepping outside anxiously to investigate, he found his father striding up and down, gesticulating wildly in the characters of Bill Sikes at Nancy. With every circumstance, the son wrote, of the most aggravated brutality. Dickens was planning his next reading tour. Friends implored him not to include the scene of the death of Nancy. The realism with which he performed it terrified the public, and it left him shattered physically and emotionally, but he was quite adamant. It must be included. He scarcely understood himself why he felt so impelled to enact and reenact that savage scene. He simply knew he had to do it. Was it something to do with his wife? Or perhaps Ellen Ternan? Or was it all women by whom he had been obsessed throughout his life? Yet he also took on the voice of Nancy, screaming and pleading with Bill to the very point of her death. He was both murderer and victim, man and woman. He wrote out his manuscript by hand, heavily underlining certain words. Stage directions fill the margins of his copy of Oliver Twist. Beckon down. Point. Shudder. Turn round in terror. Murder coming. Mystery. Terror through to the end. Get up. Bill? Is that you, Bill? Get up. There was a candle burning, but Sikes withdrew it from the candlestick and hurled it into the grate. Seeing the first light of morning without, the girl rose to undraw the curtain. Leave it. There's light enough for what I gotta do. Bill? What'd you look at me like that for? Bill? The robber regarded her for an instant with dilated nostrils and heaving breath. Then, grasping her by the head and throat, he dragged her into the middle of the room and placed a heavy hand on her mouth. "You was watched tonight, you she-devil! Every word you said was heard, Bill! If every word I said was heard, it was heard! I spared you for God's sake, Bill! For your own sake, for my sake, stop before you spill my blood! I have been true to you, Bill, upon my guilty soul! I have been true to you!" The housebreaker freed an arm and grasped his pistol. Certainty of immediate detection if he fired it flashed through his mind. So he smashed down twice on her face, which almost touched his own. She staggered and fell, nearly blinded by the blood which rained down from the gash in her forehead. And raising herself up by her knees, she drew a white handkerchief from her bosom and held it up to heaven, whispering a last prayer for mercy to her Maker. It was a ghastly figure to look upon. The murderer staggered back towards the wall, shielding his eyes with one hand, and then seizing a heavy club, he brought it down. The bright sun rose over the crowded city in clear and radiant glory. Through costly-colored glass and paper-mended window, through cathedral dome and rotten crevice, it shed its equal ray. It even lighted the room where the murdered woman lay. It did. She tried to block it out, but it would stream through. It was a ghastly figure in the dull morning. What was it now in all that brilliant light? He had not moved. He did not dare to stir, and then there was a moan, an emotion of her hand, and with turn into rage, he seized his club, and he brought it down again, and again, and again, and again. There was the body, mere flesh and blood, no more, but what flesh and how much blood! The stains were dispersed throughout the room. The very feet of his dog were bloody. All this time he had never dared once turn his back on the corpse. And now the murderer moved backwards towards the door, dragging his dog with him. Softly closed the door, turned the key, withdrew it, and left the house. Despite Dickens's physical and mental exhaustion at this time, his writing has lost nothing whatever of its unique, inventive expansiveness. A late novel like Our Mutual Friend, in which the comic and the sublime wander through the echo chamber of London, simply brims with hilarity. Mr. and Mrs. Podsnap had requested the honor of the company of 17 of their friends to celebrate the 18th birthday of their little Georgina. Hideous solidity was the characteristic of the Podsnap plate. Everything was made to seem as heavy as it could and to take up as much room as possible. The majority of the guests were like the plate. It included several very heavy articles weighing ever so much. A foreigner was among their number, and it was the droll disposition not only of Mr. Podsnap, but of everybody else, to treat him as if he were a child who was hard of hearing. "How do you like London?" "Londra, London." The foreigner admired it very much. "You find it very large?" said Mr. Podsnap, spaciously. The foreigner found it very large indeed, and very rich. The foreigner said it was indeed enormément riche.
No, said Mr. Podsnap, no. We say enormously rich. Enormously rich, ventured the foreigner. And have you found, sir, many evidences of our British Constitution in the streets of the world's metropolis? London, Londra, London. We Englishmen are very proud of our Constitution. It was bestowed upon us by Providence. No other country has been so favored as this country. And are there countries? Other, said Mr. Podsnap. In England, Angleterre, England, we do not say there. We say other. TH, the sound is the. 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 And the countries? This island is blessed, sir, to the direct exclusion of such other countries as may happen to be. There is about an Englishman a combination of qualities, modesty, an independence, a responsibility, a repose, combined with an absence of anything which might draw a blush to the cheek of a young person, that you will seek in vain among the nations of the earth. Having delivered this little summary, Mr. Podsnap, with his favourite right arm flourish, put the rest of Europe, the whole of Africa, Asia, and America nowhere. In January of 1870, Dickens, despite desperately poor health, embarked on yet another season of public readings, at the end of every single one of which he had to be carried backstage and laid upon a sofa. He could not speak for 10 minutes afterwards. His doctor came to see him after one performance, and he begged him to stop instantly. He was killing himself. Finally, even Dickens was forced to concede that he could no longer continue with the public readings. And the very last one of all, which took place here in London at the St. James's Hall, he read the trial scene from the Pickwick Papers and A Christmas Carol. The applause at the end was overwhelming. Holding up a hand to silence it, he said, "From the earliest years of my career down to this proud night, I have always tried to be true to my calling. I trust that the public believe that with a host of shortcomings and imperfections upon my head, I have always tried as a writer in my soul and conscience to be as true to them as they have ever been. To me, from these garish lights I vanish now forevermore. Grateful, heartfelt, respectful, and affectionate farewell." He returned to the country to keep writing The Mystery of Edwin Drood. On Wednesday, the 8th of June, 1870, contrary to his usual practice, he worked on the novel all day, and then he came down to dinner. Georgina noticed an alteration in his expression and bearing. "Are you ill?" She said. "Yes," he said, "I'm very ill. I've been very ill this last hour." He wanted to go to London immediately, but then he fell into a fit, against which he struggled, talking rapidly and incoherently. "Come and lie down," said Georgina. "Yes," he said. "Upon the ground." Those were the last words he uttered. Perhaps even in that extremity, he was recalling the words of his character, Louisa Gradgrind, from Hard Times. "If you hold me, I shall die.
lay me upon the ground. At about 5:45 the following evening, his breathing rapidly diminished and he started to sob. He sobbed for 15 minutes. Then he heaved a deep sigh. A tear rose to his right eye and rolled down his cheek. And he was dead. 58 years old. At his funeral service, which took place in Westminster Abbey, where he's buried alongside Samuel Johnson and David Garrick, and next to the busts of Chaucer and Milton and Shakespeare, the oration perfectly captured the mood of the country. He whose loss we mourn today occupied during his lifetime a greater space in the minds of Englishmen than any other writer. We read him, we talked about him, we acted him. We laughed with him. We were roused by him to a consciousness of the misery of others and to a sympathetic interest in human life. Men felt that they had lost not a great writer only, but a man whom they had known personally. Let us then bid him farewell. And there, in the midst of all this, stood Mr. Pickwick. Let us leave our old friend in one of those moments of unmixed happiness of which, if we seek them, there are ever some to cheer our transitory existence here. There are dark shadows upon the earth, but its lights are brighter by the contrast. Some men, like bats or owls, have better eyes for the darkness than the light. But we who have no such optical powers are better pleased to take a last parting look at our imaginary companions. When the brief sunshine of this world blazes full upon them.
I hope that you might leave the theatre feeling that you'd actually encountered Dickens, or for a while you lived inside his head.